This weekend, there are celebrations all over the country in regards to Juneteenth. And we also have on Monday the celebration of West Virginia, whose motto is "Mountaineers are always free." And I think that this is an appropriate time for us to discuss the history of West Virginia, slavery, and Juneteenth. So let's travel back in time before we became known as West Virginia. It was long before the Civil War that the two sides of Virginia were pulled in different directions. Western Virginians pleaded for new roads and canals from the east, but Eastern Virginians blocked improvements because they feared higher taxes. Boy, doesn't that conversation still ring true? As I'm sure many of you are aware, that voting was not intended for all of us. If you were not a landowner, you had no rights to participate in the electoral process. As many states were adopting universal suffrage for white males and popular elections for all offices, Virginia was against such an idea. No one could vote in Virginia except landowners. They only elected legislators, and the General Assembly chose governors, judges, and county officials. Western Virginians believed broader democracy would bring the roads and canals that they so desperately wanted, so they supported a proposed constitution full of reforms. However, in an 1830 election, the West voted in favor of a new constitution, but the East opposed it, and the proposal failed. As we venture further down history, we will begin to see attitudes in the East change. In 1850, a constitutional convention agreed on white male suffrage, popular elections, and greater representation for the West. After voter approval, Virginia conducted popular elections in 1851. Let's fast forward to the start of the Civil War. When the war began in April of 1861, Virginia prepared to succeed. Leaders of Western Virginia met in Wheeling on May the 11th and agreed to convene again if Virginia actually succeeded. On May 23rd, Virginia seceded from the Union. On June 13th, the Western leaders again met at Wheeling. They wanted statehood, but the U.S. Constitution required Virginia's approval. How would that happen? With Virginia having left the Union, West Virginia delegates formed a reorganized government of Virginia, which was recognized by President Lincoln as the official government of Virginia. That government granted itself permission to form the state of West Virginia. In May of 1862, West Virginia applied to Congress for admission to the Union. Congress agreed to allow West Virginia statehood if West Virginia would make provisions for limiting or the outright abolition of the enslavement of African Americans in West Virginia. The 1860 census conducted prior to the Civil War counted 18,371 slaves among the 376,688 persons in the counties that would become West Virginia. In that census, there were 3,593 slave owners in Western Virginia, with the average slaveholder owning 5 slaves. According to the Heritage Encyclopedia, no one owned slaves in McDowell or Hancock counties. When Congress sent the bill to admit West Virginia to the Union to Lincoln, he dreaded the precedents of dividing a state. He even consulted with his cabinet, and they were split on such an idea. On New Year's Eve, the last day to sign or veto a bill, President Lincoln signed the bill. Lincoln wrote, "We cannot retain their confidence and cooperation if we seem to break faith with them." At another constitutional convention, West Virginia approved a gradual abolition. T. Wiley introduced an amendment to the West Virginia Constitution, which was eventually approved by West Virginia voters, Congress, and then President Lincoln. The Wiley Amendment established a gradual emancipation of some enslaved people in the soon-to-be state of West Virginia, rather than the complete abolition of slavery. Under the Wiley Amendment, only enslaved people under the age of 25 would have been emancipated. That satisfied Lincoln. On April 20th of 1863, he declared that West Virginia would achieve statehood in 60 days. When President Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation on January 1 of 1863, he did not free the slaves in West Virginia. The proclamation declared that all persons held as slaves within the rebellious states are and henceforward shall be free. This proclamation did not apply to West Virginia because West Virginia opposed the rebellion and thus was not considered a state in rebellion. Although West Virginia broke away from Virginia and joined a war to end legal slavery lasted longer in West Virginia than in Virginia. Although West Virginia adopted its state motto of "Mountaineers are always free" on September 26 of 1863, West Virginia slaves did not gain their freedom until 1865, when the state legislature, in its third session at Wheeling, abolished slavery by a vote of 17-1. That action freed about 1 of every 20 persons in West Virginia. A very interesting story of West Virginia's connection to slavery is that of the account of Mary Elizabeth Johnson, also known as Molly Gabe. Molly Gabe was born at Flatwoods, the daughter of Jane Rhea, a slave woman who was the property of Dr. John Rhea. Dr. Rhea was a traveling minister who later studied medicine. He came to Flatwoods with his bride from Virginia. They brought with them several slaves. Among those slaves was Molly Gabe's mother, Jane. Dr. Rhea was one of the few slave owners in Braxton County. Molly Gabe's childhood was happy with several brothers and sisters for companions, and little work was required before she was sold. There are differing accounts of the sale. In the stories, her age varies from 4 to 13. Some say that the sale occurred at an auction, but others say it took place at the Rhea home, where the children were lined up in order that a single prospective buyer could look them over and make his choice. An older sister was reportedly withheld from sale because she was needed by Dr. Rhea's wife, and a younger brother was rejected because of speech difficulties. Although she was very young when she was sold, she remembered the details vividly. The Braxton Democrat published her account in February of 1939. Here is how she tells her story. I was playing with my sisters when a stranger rode up to the house, and Dr. Rhea went out to talk to him. After a while, the doctor called, "Jane, dress them chaps and bring 'em out here." That meant me and my 2 sisters. I was the least one. We went out and lined up, and the doctor said, "Now take your pick and choice." But later he said they couldn't spare the older sister because his wife needed her. The man looked over and said, "How much for the little one?" And Dr. Rhea answered, $650, and the bargain was made. With tears in her eyes and her voice trembling, Molly Gabe said she was too young to know what it all meant. She can remember the tears streaming down her old mammy's face as she was lifted on the horse in front of her new owner and rode away to be separated from her loved ones for many years. Her new home was in Clay County, and in that community there were no other slaves. She was not told of her freedom and does not know how long she was kept in ignorance, but said, "I reckon I'd be down there yet if my mammy hadn't sent for me." It was in threshing time that she looked out and saw her uncle Mo Maria riding up and leading a horse. She was overjoyed as she had heard nothing from her family since she was sold. Her uncle's first words to her were, "Well, I reckon they told you the war is over and we are free." And she answered, "My God, no." "Well," he said, "we are just as free as they are, and Jane sent me to bring you home." Thus, she was reunited with her family. What exactly is Juneteenth? Juneteenth, short for June 19th, marks the day when federal troops arrived in Galveston, Texas in 1865 to take control of the state and ensure that all enslaved people be free. The troops' arrival came a full 2.5 years after the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation. Juneteenth honors the end to slavery in the United States and is considered the longest-running African American holiday. The Emancipation Proclamation, issued by President Abraham Lincoln on January the 1st of 1863, had established that all enslaved people in Confederate states in rebellion against the Union shall be then thenceforth and forever free. But in reality, as I mentioned before, the Emancipation Proclamation didn't instantly free enslaved people. The proclamation only applied to places under Confederate control and not to slave-holding border states or rebel areas already under Union control. However, as Northern troops advanced into the Confederate South, many enslaved people fled behind Union lines. In Texas, slavery had continued as the state experienced no large-scale fighting or significant presence of Union troops. Many enslavers from outside the Lone Star State had moved there, as they viewed it as a safe haven for slavery. After the war came to a close in the spring of 1865, General Granger's arrival in Galveston that June signaled freedom for Texas' 250,000 enslaved people. Although emancipation didn't happen overnight for everyone, in some cases, enslavers withheld the information until after harvest season. Celebrations broke out among newly freed black people, and Juneteenth was born. That December, slavery in America was formally abolished with the adoption of the 13th Amendment. The following year of 1865, freed men in Texas organized the first of what became the annual celebration of Jubilee Day on June 19th. In the ensuing decades, Juneteenth commemorations featured music, barbecues, prayer services, and other activities. As black people migrated from Texas to other parts of the country, the Juneteenth tradition spread. In 1979, Texas became the first state to make Juneteenth an official holiday. Several others followed suit over the years. In June of 2021, Congress passed a resolution establishing Juneteenth as a national holiday. President Joe Biden signed it into law on June the 17th of 2021.